of the computer. So you have to do some research over there. Yep.
Did you say they don't sell no more Windows XP?
Nope, we cannot buy Windows XP anymore.
Oh my God! Oh yeah, because this is part of the operating system. Like they recommended for the system that I want.
Oh.
However, they're at the top here. They recommend a Windows 7 Professional.
I don't think you can find XP anymore. Even when you buy a Dell, that's not an option anymore. Yep.
7's able to, I forget what they call it, but you can boot up as XP in 7.
Okay.
It's Ultimate. It's one of the Ultimates that can do it.
Okay. So it can pretend to be XP.
It can pretend to be XP.
Now, does it use only the resources that the typical XP installation would use?
I don't have Ultimate, so
I don't have Windows, so I have no idea. I have two Windows installations. One is a Vista, which is on a dual boot box, and the other one is my wife's laptop computer, which only has Home Basic, so I cannot boot into XP because of that.
I just got done taking a Windows 7 class, and what was I going to say?
Bob Keller said something.
Yeah. I lost it though. I remember what it was.
Okay, well, when you remember, let me know. Because I kind of need to move forward with these.
I like Windows 7, though. I think it's a good version. Oh, that's what it was. On my Windows 7 class, on my laptop, I only had a lower version, and I had to have the Ultimate in order to do it, so I had to come to school to do it.
Oh, okay.
So it's something that...
Well, if your class requires Windows 7 Ultimate, what you can do is to go through our MSDNAA. Yeah. You can go through that and actually get Windows 7 Ultimate.
But for that, you have to have your professor sign you up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you're in let's say cisc310, you are qualified to get the MSDNAA license.
Right. Most people don't know that you have to have your professor sign up. So.
Yep. When the professor signs you up, he signs up the entire class, so you might be signed up already.
Yeah, I've been signed up every semester, so yeah.
Yep. So that's a really great way for $29 times whatever number of units of that class, you can get the Microsoft software. And once you have it installed, it is a full installation. It is not timed. It is not going to expire when you stop taking that class. So it's a good deal.
Yeah, it is.
So you have to compare the alternatives. If you're installing Windows 7, you have to compare the different versions of Windows 7. Look at the price, look at the cost of each one, look at the feature set of each one, and say, well, I kind of need a little more than just Home Basic, but at the same time, the extra features of Ultimate is not something that I really need. So you have to pick the one that is most beneficial, has everything that you want, but no extra stuff that you do not need. Explain why you choose one of the two. You have to use the selection criteria specific to this component. In other words, when you think about buying, let's say, RAM, how much RAM? That depends on what you're going to do with the system. Okay? If this component needs to interface with another component, and just about any component interfaces with at least one other component, because if you have one component that can stand alone by itself, doesn't interface to everything else, it's probably useless. Okay? So you have to list all the components that can interface with this component and explain why you are so sure that this component will work with the other components. Okay? For instance, you pick... Okay, once you have selected Windows 7, you have to select your processor, right? And you have to make sure that you select a processor that is compatible with Windows 7. Now, I'm pretty sure Microsoft's website will already tell you, you need at least, what type of a processor to run Windows 7. So you just look at that, make sure your processor, is on the list. That's it. That's basically how you make sure that your processor will work with that operating system. Yep.
Yeah, I went on Google and I was having problems finding an Intel or AMD times 86 processor that runs on 1 gigahertz or higher. I was having problems locating one comparable to this.
They all run at least at 1 gigahertz. And they're all x86 compatible.
Yeah, I was having problems with, because I was looking for identify manufacturer so it can be comparable to this, and almost finding a decent processor.
Well, that depends on, remember when we talked about, processors, we talked about, all the various specifications of a processor. One is how many cores does it have, and two, how much level 3 cache does it have. So I've considered those, some of the most important factors when you consider a processor. So you start with that, and then you go to newegg.com, and you can list all of the processors that they are selling today, and then you just look at, you can sort it by price. Okay, you can look at the lowest end one and say, okay, what is it lacking compared to the more expensive ones? Yeah, but we have talked about all the criteria, for evaluating whether a processor, how fast is that processor, and but ultimately, of course, it depends on what you're doing with it. Do you actually need all that speed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is the one that from my system they recommended.
Okay. They recommend. Most processors are running at least at 2 point something gigahertz these days, and they are all x86 compatible. The only time you have processors that are not x86 compatible would be when you specify a cell phone, a Kindle, an ebook reader, and stuff like that. Then they get into the processors that are not x86 compatible.
Comparable to 86.
Hmm?
Did you say that they're all comparable to 86?
They're all compatible with the x86. So in the instruction set, they're all compatible.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to worry about that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, any processor that you can buy, as an individual chip from Newegg or Tiger Direct, they're all x86 compatible. Yeah.
Who's they? When you say they recommend, who's they?
Well, this is an IBM system I'm using. This is what they recommended.
Is it recommended by the software or recommended by?
This system is created by IBM, and it's a statistical analysis, behavioral science analysis, so
Okay.
operating system.
Okay.
And this is what they recommend. And now I got to go back and see, well, which one.
Okay. Well, I'll have to take a look at that because that seems very, very specific. Yep. Go ahead. Okay. Oh, okay. Nope. Okay. Okay. So if this component, so getting back to how you can make sure that your component will work with all the other components, you basically have to look at, rely on standards and also specifications. Okay. Let's say you are specifying a hard drive. Okay. Now, on the list of items, you specify a hard drive after you specify the motherboard, right? And a hard drive has at least two components to interface to. One is the motherboard, and the second one would be the power supply unit. So you have to make sure that the power supply unit has a power plug that is compatible to the power plug of the hard drive. Okay, and that's usually listed. When you look at the power supply unit, it will tell you that it has a SATA type power connector. Okay, and it will tell you how many of those connectors they have. And then you have to look at your motherboard and see if your motherboard has a SATA connector. And these days, just about any motherboard would have at least 4 SATA connectors. Okay, so it will only be a problem when you try to specify, say, an IDE hard drive. Then you might find certain motherboards that are without an IDE connector. So it won't be able. You cannot, use this hard drive with the motherboard that you choose. Another thing that you might, as an example, when you specify a processor, you specify the processor first, and then you specify the motherboard. So you have to make sure the socket types of those two are compatible. If you select an high-end i7 that has the 1300 something pin count, and you specify a motherboard that only has a 1156 socket type, then they're not going to work. Okay, and no snipping pins out of the processor is not an option. Yep.
When we're putting everything together and compiling all the specifications,
Yes.
this and that. When we're putting it out on paper, do we use maybe a big board and kind of have a picture and kind of put things like that, or how do you want?
I will talk about that later on.
Oh,
it is
okay.
also in the assignment description itself.
I don't want to jump the gun, but I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's
where am I
okay.
supposed
That's
to
good.
put
Remind me if I don't talk about it. Okay. So you want to indicate for each component that you have selected, indicate the source and also the price of the item. In other words, where do you plan to buy the component if you are to put the system together, and how much is it as of the time you write the article or you write the report. Okay, so it doesn't have to be up to date to the day you turn in the report. Anything from today or even from 2 weeks ago, if you have done the research like 2 weeks ago, which some people have, it's fine. Okay, as long as it is recent enough, that is okay. Okay, so after you specify all the components, which is going to be a big, long, huge section, you want to indicate the overall price of the system. In other words, add up the cost of every single component, and then you tell me how much you have to pay for the system. Okay, well, we can talk about that later. Okay, because because you have a very specific kind of system, so I have to take a look at that later, or maybe come to my office hour at about noontime. I can help you out with that too. Okay, so you have to tell me, is that a fair price? In other words, you look at the price of the system that you're putting together, and then you look at some system they can buy off the shelf, say from Costco. Okay, with comparable components, comparable hard drive storage space, and so on and so forth. So how does it compare? Is your system more expensive, less expensive, about the same? Well, you have to tell me. Okay. In other words, this is not an opinion type of question. It is simply is it greater than, equal to, or less than? That's all I wanted to know. You can compare to things that you can buy off the shelf, well, quote unquote off the shelf, from Dell, HP, and etc. Just go to the Dell website. If you're putting a game system together, go to the Dell website, look into the Alienware line of products, okay, and look through some of those options and say, well, I'm putting together a system using the i7-950 processor. So look for one of those boxes from Dell or Alienware that has similar hardware. And then you look at the price. You configure the Dell computer. You look at yours and go like, well, I'm paying this much for my system, and Alienware wants this much money for their system. Okay, and then you tell me whether the price of your system is a fair price. Okay, it's just basically an exercise to make sure that you guys know how to compare and contrast the components and say, okay, how do I know that this system is similar to mine? Okay, what do I use to evaluate that? Okay, and here's the summary piece. The summary piece will basically, you can recap the overall system and what you want to do with it. But the most important part is to indicate what is the future use of the system. How long do you think the system will last before it is obsoleted, or before it becomes obsolete? That's a big factor, okay? Because if you put together a system today and in 2 years it will be obsolete, that means after 2 years you have to do something. You can either upgrade the components or you can put a new system together and phase this one out entirely. So that brings us to the second question. What do you plan to upgrade? Do you plan to upgrade the system as better components become less expensive, and why do you choose to upgrade or not to upgrade? Okay? I can see reasons to upgrade. I can see reasons not to upgrade. If you're upgrading, that means there'll be components coming out of your old system. What are you going to do with the old processor, the old RAM, and whatnot? Most of the time, you just toss it because you can't find anything else to put those things into, unless you have a long cascade of computers that you can cascade components. But if you have a long cascade, let's say you have 4 systems. And if you upgrade the highest end, the highest end goes to the middle end goes to the lower end, and then the lower end goes to the lowest end, that's a lot of trouble. Okay? Instead of working with one computer, every time you buy a new component for the top of the line computer, you have to basically modify every system below that. And sometimes it's not even possible. So that's why you may not want to just upgrade the system, because you'll end up with a lot of